back in session. Parties and counsel are present, all members of our jury or alternates are present, or witnesses stop on the witness stand, and Ms. Collins, you may resume your examination.
So once you arrived at grave B and observed what was going on, did it appear anything had happened prior to your arrival to document what you were seeing?
Yeah, it appeared that the grave excavation already began.
Were you made aware that some items were possibly already recovered from grave B prior to your arrival?
Yes.
So you were not there to document those and wouldn't have personal knowledge of it?
I do have personal knowledge because it was told to me, but I wasn't there for the recovery.
Okay. So then, from that point on, can you tell us in general some of the observations you made as personnel were starting to excavate grave B?
Started recovering remains, basically skeletonized remains, bones, some clothing items, and as the excavation continued, other items of evidence such as phone case and ultimately a sledgehammer.
I'm going to start with exhibit number 222. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes.
Please describe it for us.
This is the top portion of grave B, which, if you look on the top left corner of the grave, there is some black material in hair and some what appears to be the beginning of a skull fragment.
And do you recall approximately how deep into the excavation this was starting to be seen?
I documented many deaths, so I don't want to give you the wrong numbers, so would it be okay if I look at my report?
Would it refresh your recollection as to the depth to refer to your report?
Yes, it would.
With the court's permission?
Sure.
That was about 10 inches.
That material to the upper left of the hair and skull fragments that you're seeing, was that removed from the grave?
Eventually, yes.
Showing you what's been marked as exhibit 223. You recognize that?
Yes.
Is that material removed from the grave?
Yes.
And what did it end up being?
It was a pair of pants, black pants, and intertwined with it was white female underwear.
Those items were collected as evidence by who?
It was excavated by coroner hunters.
Would that have been collected and maintained by Ms. Radliff, the CSI person?
Eventually, yes.
You did not take part in that, did you?
No, I was just documenting what was being found and excavated.
And you would not have taken part in any processing of that item of evidence either, right?
At the lab?
Yes.
No.
Okay. As the dig continued, I'm showing you exhibit. Can you describe what we're seeing here?
To the left of the screen, you see what appears to be a skull. A little bit to the right of the skull, you see what appears to be a strap from a backpack. And then further to the right, it's a body glove cell phone case.
Can you use the laser pointer up there to point those out for us?
Sure. So this is the skull. This is the strap that I'm talking about for the backpack. And this is the cell phone case.
Was there a cell phone in that cell phone case?
No.
And I take it was removed from the gravesite as well?
Correct.
Exhibit 225. You recognize that?
Yes.
Is that just a close-up view of the cell phone case?
That is correct.
You mentioned a backpack. Was that excavated as well while you were there?
Yes.
Showing you Exhibit 226. You recognize that?
Yes.
Tell us what we're looking at.
It's a child-sized backpack that was recovered from the grave.
Exhibit number 227, you recognize that?
Yes.
Is that the backpack after it was removed?
That's correct.
As the excavation continued, did it become apparent that there was more of a human skeletal remains in the grave that you could see?
Yes.
Adult or a child?
At this point, I believe it was all, we were on the south end of the bottom of the grave, and it was all child remains.
Okay. And then as it progressed, did that change?
I may have.
I'll show you exhibit number 228. You recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe what we're looking at, please?
This is a continued excavation of the skull of the adult body that was in the grave.
And approximately how deep were you in the grave at this point, do you know?
I don't recall if I could refer to my report.
If it would refresh your recollection?
Sure.
I actually don't have the depth for this photograph. I only have the degrees and the feet from the scene data point.
During the excavation, were there multiple bones recovered as the dig went through the dirt?
Yes.
And at this point, we haven't covered every minuscule piece of bone that was recovered, have we?
No.
And were they at varying depths as the dig went deeper into grave B?
Yes.
Approximately how deep did the dig get with the recovery of bones and other material while the time you were there?
You know, by the time we were all finished with the excavation,
Sure.
that's like 18.5 inches.
You mentioned the recovery of a sledgehammer. I'm showing you exhibit number 234. You recognize that?
Yes.
Can you explain to us what we're seeing? Well, maybe not. Let's try this.
That is the head of the sledgehammer.
Did you notate or were you providing information approximately how deep that was?
About 17 inches.
Was that ultimately fully uncovered?
Yes, it was.
Exhibit number 235. You recognize that?
Yes.
Please describe what we're looking at.
This is the head of the sledgehammer with the handle, heel handle. Stanley brand.
And exhibit number 236. You recognize that?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a Stanley 3-pound sledgehammer. Not completely excavated, but the surface of it.
Showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 745 and 745A. Do you recognize that object?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a sledgehammer. It's what was recovered from within the grave.
When you first saw it, can you describe?
That object is the foundation, how he knows that's the actual sledgehammer.
Overruled.
Was there another item of clothing removed from the grave, B, that was significant?
Child clothing?
Was there?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember what?
It was a blue pair of pants with a pull-up inside of it.
What do you mean by pull-up?
Child pull-up. I believe it was marked 12-month. Diaper.
Thank you. Okay. Just trying to make sure we're clear, all on the same page. So, was there also a piece of women's clothing?
Correct.
And what was that?
That was half of a bra.
Showing you exhibit number 237. You recognize that?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's half of a bra that was recovered from the grave, and it appears to have some white towel along with it.
Exhibit number 238. Is that the other side of the bra?
Well, it is the same bra, the same piece, just flipped over.
That's what I meant by the other side.
Okay.
Sorry, not the other half, the other side.
Right.
I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 747 and 747A. You recognize that object?
Yes.
What is it?
It appears that it is a bra that's depicted in the photograph.
Objection, foundation.
Overruled.
Who was ultimately responsible for the collection, documentation, and processing of all of the items that would have been removed from the gravesite?
That was the coroner's office responsibility.
And things such as the clothing, the sledgehammer, etc., that would have been the responsibility of whom?
Well, it depends. There has to be an agreement between the coroner's office and the crime scene specialists.
Okay. And in this case, was some of that evidence, such as the sledgehammer and bra and clothing, processed by someone?
Yes.
Who was that?
Would have been Heather Radliff.
You did not participate in that?
And what?
The handling and processing at a later date?
I did not.
During the processing of the scene, did you become aware of tire track impressions, for lack of a better term?
Yes.
And who drew your attention to those?
I don't recall who it was, but I'm aware that they were there.
I'm showing you exhibit number 241. Do you recognize that image?
Yes.
Can you tell us what we're looking at?
That is the
I'm
attack.
sorry, what exhibit is that?
241. Go ahead.
That is what we believed to be tire tracks
Okay.
leading up to grade B.
Have you investigated cases involving tire impressions before?
Yes, I have.
Were these extremely detailed and evidence-producing tire tracks?
No, they were not.
How would you describe these?
It was basically tracks, maybe leading to believe that there was a vehicle that either drove to or backed up to the grave with no detail, no rich detail.
When you say no ridge detail, that means you were unable to see a tread pattern.
That is correct.
Could you draw any conclusions from the condition of those tracks to determine how old they were?
Based on the lack of detail, I would assume they were for at least over 6 months.
Given the fact that do they appear to have some depth to them?
Correct.
Okay. And what would that lead you to believe?
That the terrain was soft or wet, perhaps.
When do you know the terrain in the desert to be soft, let alone wet?
In wintertime.
Okay. Typically, would it be close in time to an actual rain event?
Yes.
Does the desert dry out in your experience pretty quickly?
Yes, it does.
How long have you been associated with the desert?
About 30 years.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as 242. Do you recognize that?
I can't quite see it in this picture. I'm waiting for the screen to change.
Okay.
Oh, is that? Okay, that's it. That appears to be the second set of tire tracks.
And where were those located?
Those were directly west of grade A.
Was the impression in the dirt as distinct as the one going to grave B?
It was pretty much the same. No detail, just grooves or where you would believe or think that tires traveled.
Can you give us, by pointing to it, a rough indication where those are in case others are having trouble visualizing it in the picture?
If you look at the groove over here to the left of the picture, that would be the edge of what would be the left tire.
Left tire if it backed in or pulled in?
If it backed in.
Okay.
And this would be the other tire track.
Let's see if changing the camera angle made it any better or worse, as you know, cameras can. 243. Does that make it a little better?
Well, not on the hard copy you gave me, but on the screen I can actually see it.
Okay, can you point that out for us on the screen?
There is one. And here's the other one.
To the left of the picture, what is that white material or whatever's on the ground? Do you know what that is?
It appears to be a piece of white towel that was been there for some time.
Do you know if that was collected, or do we have to ask Ms. Ratliff?
You probably have to ask Ms. Ratliff. I know that we collected some white pieces of towel that were out there outside the graves.
At the bottom, right, or bottom left of the picture, does that appear to be a bone to you, or do you know?
Well, it appears to be a bone, but when we were doing the walkthrough or the area search, we were marking with pink flags any bone, whether it was an animal or a human, later to be revised or examined by Dr. Bray.
This picture could have been taken before that, though, right?
That's correct.
Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. Whose car is that in the background, since we're asking questions about the picture?
I don't recall.
Okay.
That may be a coroner's office vehicle. And this was towards the end of the excavation.
Were measurements taken of the two tire impressions, using that term loosely, the ones that you just showed us going to grade A and grade B? Were measurements taken of those?
Width and length.
Okay. And the ones going to grade, indicating, well, this one going to grade A, what were the measurements for that tire impression?
Just off the top of my head, I can give you the numbers, but if you want specifics, I can refer to my report.
If it would refresh your recollection, please do.
Yes, it would.
Your Honor, he's looking to you for approval.
Okay, grade A, the width was 73 inches, and it was 19 feet and 3 inches long approximately. And the measurements for the tire tracks going to grade B were 76 inches long, wide, and 35 feet, 5 inches long.
Given the nature of the impression, the potential age of them, how accurate are those numbers, in essence, of the pattern?
We measured what?
Your Honor, excuse me, the objection is cause for speculation.
Sustained.
Was that from the outside of the impression to the outside of the impression, or inside of the impression to the inside of the impression?
The width measurement, the first one, is from the outside to the outside.
Would the condition of the soil in which impressions were left like that tend to either minimize or exaggerate a tire impression, especially if it was wet?
Objection, foundation and speculation.
Overruled, James.
Your Honor, he hasn't established any expertise in soil interpretation or anything.
The objection's overruled.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Would the condition of the soil, whether it's wet or hard or whatever it is, tend to affect how that impression is put into the dirt?
Correct. It would.
Would it cause potential variations in your
Yes, it would.
Objection, foundation.
Overruled.
During the excavation of grave B, were you aware of any footwear being recovered?
No.
During the excavation of grave B, in your observations, the remains of the adult and the child, did you notate an orientation of which way they were laying?
Yes.
And what was that?
They were both, the heads were facing, or on the north side of the grave, if you would, and their feet were to the side.
Give me just a second here, I think I may be close to being done. The sledge, did the excavation of grave B also take over a period of 2 days as well?
Yes.
Was the sledgehammer recovered on the first day or the second day?
Second day.
I have nothing further, thank you.
Cross.
Yes, 1 second.
So before you began your cross, Mr. Jones, did you have him identify Exhibit 223?
Yeah. 223?
Yes,
223. It was?
yes.
Okay, I missed it then.
Is it in front of you, Mr. Avila? Yes, then I did.
Okay. All right, cross, Mr. D.
Thank you. Sergeant?
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So you went to the area in the Victor Valley on the November 12th, about 9 a.m.?
It was about 7:30 when I got there.
About 9:30, you start doing an area search?
About so.
At some point, you were able to come to the graves, grade A and B, and start working in that part of the process.
Correct.
Is it true that you assigned Detective Bachman to handle grade A,
Yes.
and you self-assigned yourself to grade B?
Yes.
Were you the one that was given kind of like a case agent position for the gravesite?
At that time, yes.
And in grade A, you had Detective Bachman do, isn't Ms. Brunel the one that you assigned to help Detective Bachman?
I don't know who Bachman worked with for the excavation of grave A.
And Ms. Brunel, you said she was a volunteer?
Correct.
Does she have any expertise in that would allow her to be in that crime scene?
I don't know that.
So you let somebody in your crime scene without knowing if she could contaminate evidence?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Your Honor, 1 second. So you mentioned that the gravesites were near a gas line. What do you mean by that?
Objection, this states his testimony.
Overruled, you can explain.
It was a gas line road or trail, if you would.
Can you just explain to the jury what you mean by what that is, so they get an understanding of what they would, what you're trying to describe?
What that means is that there is a gas line or pipe that was put in that particular area, meaning there is a gas line underneath the surface of the terrain.
So it's some kind of change to the area by man, so it kind of has a path or some kind of, it's not like a rolling terrain, necessarily.
Well, what I can say is that it looks like the dirt's been dug up and put back in, if that explains it.
And so the ground's kind of softer.
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled, it can answer if he knows.
Yeah, I don't know if it was softer or harder.
Well, when you were out at the gravesite area, did you walk on that gas line road?
Yes, I did.
Did it feel softer to you?
The surface, yes.
Now, you testified that the weather conditions can change the terrain and the ground in the desert area. Do you remember that part of your testimony?
Yes.
And that the desert can dry out quickly.
Well, it depends what the definition of quickly is.
That was going to be my question. What do you mean when you testify it can dry out quickly? What do you mean it can dry out quickly?
That it can dry quickly depending on how wet it is or the type of soil that you have.
What type of soil was there where tracks A and B were located that will allow you to calculate how fast they dried out?
I don't have the answer to that.
So is there any knowledge or training you have that you can say these tracks would have happened within this time frame based on how the ground is and weather conditions?
No, I don't.
We can go to computer display 4. I'm going to show you exhibit 182. You were shown this picture, correct?
What exhibit is it, I'm sorry?
182. You can see it on the screen in front of you to your left.
That looks like one of the pictures I looked at, but I don't know if it's exhibit 182.
I have on display 182.
Okay.
See that exhibit?
I see the picture, yes.
And you can see as you identified the command center on Quarry Road on the middle left.
Correct.
And then there's a mountain on the top center of the photograph.
Correct.
Isn't that kind of looking more southwest than west as you testified?
I'm going to object to since facts not known, people do not use 182.
Overall, you can answer if he knows the direction.
That would be based on what I know and what I remember west of Quarry Road.
So Quarry Road runs north-south?
Yes.
So Quarry Road is, well, I-15 run north-south?
Yes.
So Quarry Road and the I-15 run parallel?
Pretty much.
Now, when I was reviewing your report, when you testified on direct, or at least how the question came out, it seemed like you were excavating from south going north, correct?
I'm sorry, I wasn't excavating.
You were not assisting and overseeing it as the case agent and the one in charge of grade B?
I was there to document the excavation, yes, it remains.
Was it going from the south end of grade B to the north, or north to south?
My recollection is they started on the north side of the grave and moved south.
So if there's any testimony that it was started on the south and going north, that would be incorrect.
That would be incorrect.
I'm going to show you some previously marked exhibit 748. I want to go over 748 with you while going over the excavation process. On the left side of that paper, it says north, correct?
Correct.
And on the right side of the paper, it has south.
Correct.
And you documented in your report the items that were excavated from grade B in order. Does that seem right when you're writing your report?
In order of the way that they were reported to me.
Correct. And do you have that report in front of you?
Yes.
And in your report, I believe you listed out 21 items or separate lines of things that were reported to you as being excavated, correct?
Correct.
And the first 5 items that were reported to you, you did not personally see, but you were informed of the details of the order they were found and the depth. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
At least the first 4. The 5th one, you were not giving a depth amount, correct?
Well, I did get the measurements, but I wasn't there for that.
And if looking back at the exhibit I showed you, is it 748, I believe it is? On the back of that?
That is correct.
Would those items on that be the exact same orders they were on your list?
That's relevant.
In foundation for an exhibit.
We're looking at it, sir.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
Maybe if I could point to you, so you can understand the question a little bit better. On exhibit 748, starting on the left side on the north end, since you're working north to south, each item is listed in the same order as your report.
That is correct.
And on the depth, if on the side with the north, if you have lines of 6 inches, 12 inches, and 18 inches, representing the depth they were found. Does that sound accurate?
Yes.
And the same exact measurements on the south side, so it goes across.
Yes.
And so these would be in accurate order to your report, if you can review the entire exhibit in your report.
I don't think this is accurate.
You do not. You can explain, what do you see as inaccurate between your report and that exhibit?
Are you putting in here numbers 1 through 5 also, or just?
1 through 5 as well.
Okay. You have number 3, number 4.
Number 5 has no depth, so it doesn't have a depth marker, correct?
Correct. And your last 3 numbers are from the next page?
They'd be from the next day, correct?
Correct. Okay, it appears to be correct.
Okay, you can hold on to that for now.
Okay.
Now, while you were excavating grade B, you had Dr. Gray with you, correct?
For a short time.
And when you were finding, or when the different pieces of human remains were being excavated, Dr. Gray was assigning it whether or not they related to corpse 1 or corpse 2. That be accurate?
Well, for one, Dr. Gray wasn't there for the entire excavation.
But in your report, you were putting a B1 and a B2 for different things that were located. What did you mean by those numbers?
That those were reassigned B1 to the adult female remains and B2 to the small child remains.
And so in your report, when you were showing the B1 as being the adult female would not be signified on that chart as the red lines for the depth that they were located inside grave B,
Objection.
relative to the measurements on the side.
Misstates his testimony as to male or female.
Overruled, case 3.
I understand looking at this chart that your red marks are related to B1.
And the red marks are on the depth that you put in your report that was reported to you they were recovered, correct?
That is correct.
And then the other, there's a second set of lines which are blue in color for some of the items.
Correct.
And those represent B2 that you represent in your report as a child.
Correct.
And then the third color you see is a black line, which represents objects that are not part of the remains of a human person.
Correct.
And there are some items on that chart that have no lines because you did not represent a depth that they were located. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Just so we're clear, I'd like to ask about the first 5 things that were recovered, and you were informed they were recovered before you got there. Item number 1 was a cranium bone at 12 inches deep.
Objection. Calls for hearsay, lacks foundation, personal knowledge.
Overruled, is covered on direct.
Your Honor, if I heard, it was not.
No,
You can answer.
you can answer.
That is correct.
The second item was a rib bone at 12 inches deep.
Again, lacks foundation, personal knowledge.
Overruled,
Correct.
A cranium bone with hair at 12 inches deep.
Correct.
Cranium bone intermitted in dirt 7 inches deep.
Correct.
And you noted that was at the north end of the grave. All these items were found at the north end of the grave.
Correct.
And then there was a cervical vertebrae and hair without a depth given.
Correct.
And then you have a B1 skull, and you had the center of the skull at 12 feet 6 inches at 73 degrees from the data point, correct?
Correct.
But you did not have a depth of the center of that skull.
Correct.
And then you had a skull fragment at 10 inches deep.
Correct.
A rib bone at 11 inches deep.
Correct.
Vertebrae at 12 inches deep.
Correct.
Then the black pants and the white women's undergarments were 16 inches deep.
Correct.
Then the left cup of the black bra was found south of B1's skull, but it was 12 inches deep.
Correct.
Then there was a vertebrae that were 12 inches deep.
Correct.
And the long bone that was 13.5 inches deep.
Correct.
Flat bone, 14.5 inches deep.
Correct.
And then a bone that was 16 inches deep.
Correct.
And then there's a determination made that the next item found was for B2, the child remains.
Correct.
And the bones and skull that was found subsequent to this were all related to, unless stated otherwise, B2.
Correct.
And the next thing you found was a skull. It was located 16.5 inches at 83 degrees and 12.5 inches deep.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The skull that was located from the standard point, 14 feet 5 inches, excuse me, at 83 degrees and it's 12.5 feet deep.
Correct.
And then the scapula was 14 inches deep.
Correct.
Ribs were 16 inches deep.
Correct.
The black cell phone cover that was shown to you in Exhibit 225 was only 10.5 inches deep.
Correct.
And then you have items that you did not note in your report, or did not get the information of how deep they were, correct?
Correct.
And this would have been a partial skull fragment to B1 that was in, with unknown, as you described, plastic or plaster material with fabric material.
Correct.
And then there was a group of items, I guess, as best I can understand from your report, that were pulled out together. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
And that would be vertebrae from B2, rib bones, scapula, pelvis, arm bones, the black child's backpack, a femur, the blue child's pants in size 12M, and the pull-up diapers that were inside of those pants were all pulled out together.
Not together, in sections, so separate.
But you didn't note the depth of all that coming out. You weren't, I guess, overseeing it at that moment?
Well, I was there, but we were, I was documenting all the items that were being stated to me.
You just didn't note the depth of how, the order they were pulled out, what was on top of what?
Correct.
And then that was the end of the day of the 12th.
Yes.
And then you returned to finish on the 13th.
Correct.
And there's a few more things that were excavated from grave B in your presence.
Correct.
And that was a leg bone for B2 that was 17 inches deep.
Correct.
Skull fragment for B2 at 18.5 inches deep.
Correct.
Then the sledgehammer was located after those items, right, at 17 inches deep.
Correct.
And it was east of B1, but northeast of B2.
Correct.
So it was kind of in between them.
Yes.
So when all the remains of B1 are removed, the sweatpants and the ladies' undergarments that were intermingled with one another, those were found underneath the remains, correct?
No, they were not.
They were not 16 inches deep while the rest of the body was 10, 11, and 12?
The way that I remembered it, those pants and the undergarments were right next to the skull to B1.
So they weren't on the body.
No, they were not.
They were removed, like the undergarments kind of wrapped in the legs of the sweatpants, and it looked like thrown into the grave.
Correct.
Based on how the remains were removed and the depth of the remains, the fair conclusion from yours that it seemed like the sweatpants went in before the remains of B1.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
After the items were collected from grave B, it's true you went around with Dr. Gray to observe part of the collections of the items that they had pin flagged across different areas of the scene.
I did not.
You wrote your report Hart did, I'm sorry, I thought that was you. You're right. That was Detective Hart you assigned to walk through with her, correct?
That is correct.
I want to look at Exhibit 241. This is the picture that was shown to you of the tracks leading up to gravesite B, correct?
Correct.
And this is where you can see the bottom left part where the team was, looks like has excavating equipment there in the bottom left corner.
That's correct.
And I assume grave B is further to the bottom left from there?
Yeah, it would be actually at the bottom of the picture, bottom left side.
And the grayish straight object going through the left side, I assume that's the leg of a canopy that's covering the workers so they're not out in the sun?
That's correct.
Now what is that in the center between the two, which you identify as a tire track? It looks like it's made out of wood. That's to the top right area of the photograph.
That was sifters used by the coroner's office to sift the dirt that was being excavated to see if they could locate or identify additional remains.
And so when you were working on this crime scene, it appears people could freely walk throughout the scene without being directed not to step in certain areas. Would that be accurate?
I wouldn't say that they weren't allowed to. They were working the graves. At that point, what we had was grave sites.
But if we look on the right side near the data point that was spike that was put into the ground, correct? That's what we identified, they zoomed into here.
Correct.
In between there and the tire tracks looks like a bunch of shoe prints. Accurate?
Correct.
And there was actually movement all throughout the scene when people were walking, correct?
When the excavation was taking place, yes.
And so there might be items that were recovered that could have been moved before they were recovered.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
When everybody was working the grave site excavation in your presence, did you see that everybody had some kind of gloves or protective gear on their hands when they were working that scene?
As far as I remember, yes.
So at no point you saw anybody with gloves off touching anything with their bare hands?
That is correct.
As far as you could direct, everybody who was working that scene was trying to maintain the scene integrity, the evidence being removed. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
You saw no lapses in that the entire time you were there?
Not that I can recall.
Do you know the other measures that were taken by the personnel working the grave sites on the excavation that would protect against contamination from their own, bodily fluids, sweat, or handprints or anything?
Object as to vague.
Sustained.
I mean, people made sure they wore long sleeve shirts?
I don't recall that.
After all that, well, strike that. You were also there when Ms. Rowlett photographed and collected other items outside the scene, grave site, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And then you worked with coroner investigator Hunter on identifying like the different remains and putting toe tags on those items?
I didn't.
You were advised by the investigator coroner Hunter that identificative tags were placed on the remains of 4 different persons?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
At some point, the remains were removed from the grave site,
Correct.
and the following day, an autopsy was performed at the sheriff's crime lab, or the coroner's office,
Correct.
and you you were present for that, correct?
Correct.
Did you inform the pathologist that was doing the autopsy of any information that you had about the case before the pathologist performed the autopsy?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Did you sit down with the pathologist before she started the autopsy and say, hey, this is what we know, and tell her facts about the investigation?
I did not.
So whatever the pathologist did, she did without any prior information from you?
From me, I don't know if their own investigators discussed the case with her, but no, I did not discuss it with her.
Now, you said on direct that part of grave B was sunken down below the regular ground level. Remember that part of your testimony?
Yes.
And you also stated that part of the excavation process started before you arrived.
Correct.
Did you see grave B before the excavation started, and that's where you saw the sunken area?
Yes, I did.
So it was based on a prior observation before everything started.
That is correct.
And the measurements that were done of grave B, were those done before or after the excavation was completed?
You're talking about the specific location of the grave?
I'm talking about the specific distance from the data point that you testified on direct, where you gave the distances. Were those measurements done before or after the excavation was done?
Before, when I got to the grave site, the grave B, those measurements were given to me by Ratliff.
And so that was everything where the ground was sunken down?
Now, the measurements she gave me was the degrees and the distance to the northwest corner of the grave, what we consider the northwest corner, and then the the northeast corner.
I understand that, but did Ratliff give you those numbers as the measurements that were done before the excavation or after the excavation?
I don't know at what point she obtained those measurements.
Fair enough. And B, since you were there at the grave site during the excavation, when it was complete, approximately how long would you say the grave was that was excavated?
If I can refer to my report.
Did that help to refresh your memory?
Yes, sir.
Please do, and let us know when you're done.
Sure.
Okay.
And what were the dimensions of the grave once you were done?
The length was 72 inches, approximately 20 inches at the center, middle, and then approximately 18.5 inches depth at the deepest level.
So it was 20 inches wide.
Correct.
I don't have any.
May I proceed to cross-examination?
Redirect.
Or redirect, sorry, redirect.
Yes.
Thank you. Your job with grave B was solely to document what others were telling you, correct?
That is correct.
And so if something was done found in a particular order, it may or may not have been, would it have been immediately conveyed to you in that same order, or possibly not?
That is correct.
What is correct?
They could have done something and then told me after the fact, as far as measurements or what was found where.
So the fact that you included in your report in a certain order, does that mean necessarily that's the exact order things were found?
Yeah, that they were not found in that order.
Okay. When you mentioned on cross as well as, well, somewhat indirect, moving from excavating in north to southerly direction, was that very specific or was that a generalization?
It was a generalization. So they started the excavation on the north side of the grave, then moved southward. What I remember is when they were excavating remains or any particular item of evidence, if they worked on that particular item of evidence to expose it, then that would obviously be a little deeper than any other particular area in the grave, if that makes sense.
So they were not only working north to south, but also from the top to the bottom, attempting to expose the items they're seeing?
Correct.
And who is in charge at this point of a remains recovery scene? Is it homicide or is it someone else?
The entire remains recovery rests on the coroner's office.
They're the ones in charge.
Correct.
You were just there to document what they told you they found.
Correct.
Who controls, well, who deems personnel necessary for an excavation of a gravesite?
The coroner's office.
Do you?
I don't.
You don't work for the coroner's office particularly, right?
Well, this is the same department, but I work for the sheriff's department.
You work for the other half of the department.
Correct.
Have you ever worked in the coroner's division?
Never.
Okay. Your only exposure to them is going out to scenes like this and other types of homicides and deaths.
Correct.
So, items 1 through 5, those were things that that you were not personally present for, correct?
That's correct.
And what you indicate in your report for those is what someone else would have told you.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you were shown Exhibit 748. And it has a north to south, from north on the left, south on the right. Is that correct?
Correct.
Does that mean if an item was found closer to the right-hand side, it was found in the south end of the grave? Is that what this implies to you?
That is correct.
Is that accurate?
No.
For example, the sweatpants and panties were listed a little left of center. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
But where were they found?
They were found at the top of the grave.
The north?
On the north side.
Okay. By the head, correct?
Correct.
That would be Exhibit 222, correct?
That is correct.
And is that the crumpled up black items here just above the skull with the hair?
That's correct.
So, to make this accurate, where would you, I'm going to give you a pin, draw an arrow from sweatpants and panties on Exhibit 748 to roughly where you would put it on that scale north to south.
Well, actually, I would change this direction because this is north to south, and it was northeast, or I'm sorry, northwest, southeast. Direction of the grave.
Okay, so that's also not completely accurate.
That is correct.
But at least for north to south, northeast to southwest, or northwest to southeast, whichever it was, where would you draw, or where would you put those sweat panties and bras in relation to the other items found on there?
At the top of the, closer to the north.
Okay, so can you draw an arrow from sweatpants and panties up to where approximately you think it would be? Now, it also indicates that items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are listed here, correct?
Correct.
You don't know where those were recovered, do you?
I don't.
So as the excavation's going vertically as well as laterally, does that make sense?
Yes.
Those could have been found at any depth as they started to go down. It could have been the north end or the south end.
Correct.
So you don't know.
I don't know.
So if I could, would it be fair to lump these together and say Avila doesn't know what end they're at?
That would be correct.
Okay. So I'm going to draw a little ellipse. And I'm going to write Avila doesn't know. Because, for example, the cranial bone or the cranial bone with hair could have been actually more towards the south end of the grave, couldn't it?
I don't know.
Oh, that's okay. You don't know. So this also depicts the Stanley sledgehammer as being the last thing found on the south end. Is that how this chronologically goes on here?
Based on that schematic, yes.
Okay. Where do you recall it being seen in the grave?
It was just about the middle of the grave. It was east of the adult remains and above the child remains.
So I'm going to try and get a visual from this, if I may, from what we saw in the photographs. You said the head of both the adult remains and the child remains were northerly oriented?
Yes.
Okay.
In relation to the grave.
Okay. What were the heads like equal at the top, at the north end of the grave, or
No.
okay? Where was the
skull of the adult female was at the top, near the top of the grave.
the north end of the grave?
Yes.
Okay.
The child remains were toward the bottom half of the grave.
Okay.
Sledgehammer was located east of what I would estimate torso of the adult female and above the skull of the child and a little bit east within the grave.
Okay. So that would kind of put it in the middle, right?
Pretty much.
So can you draw an arrow on the Stanley sledge and put it approximately where you would put it on this scale to make it somewhat more accurate? Okay. And you even wrote, is that T sledge?
That's a cross. That's just to tell you where
Okay.
what it would have been.
So sledge, and you actually moved it to the print right of the printing.
Right.
Would that be to indicate the east side?
Correct.
Since it's north, south, the right side of the paper would be east?
That's correct.
Okay. You didn't prepare this, correct?
No, I did not.
The fact, at least from your observational skills, the fact that one item was found deeper than the other at one end of the grave or in the middle than another, was that any significance to you?
No.
Why not?
It doesn't change anything.
Why not?
The body's still in the grave.
The cell
The
phone case?
remains still in the grave.
Okay. The cell phone case and the sledgehammer were still there too?
Correct.
But also, never mind, withdrawn. I have nothing further.
Anything further on?
Yeah. I want to correct the record, since the people destroyed a defense exhibit. And defense will be submitting a 748A that is not scratched all out. So when we describe this exhibit,
No, I move to strike counsel's commentary.
when we describe this exhibit, did we say this is a diagram of where something was found inside the grave on cross?
I don't think so.
No. What it was is the order that things were found that you listed in your report, correct?
The way that I understood it was the way that things were listed in the report, yes.
And you said you started on the northern end and went to the south generally, correct?
No, I didn't, you did.
No, that's what you did, right? You testified to
Objection,
that.
argument.
That you went,
The objection sustained.
did you not testify that when excavation was begun, it began on the north end and worked towards the south end?
Correct.
So the items that you list in your report would be in order from found if you're working from north to south, correct?
Objection misstates his testimony.
Objection sustained, calls for speculation and conclusion. And hearsay.
When you wrote your report, let me say, strike that. You testified that when things were located, a progression in the excavation was going from the north to the south, correct?
Correct.
And all this chart did is showed the depth relation as things were being found based on what you documented in your report, correct?
That is correct.
So it's not where is it in the grave. That's not what this chart was supposed to represent when we went over it on cross, was it?
Objection, argumentative.
Objection sustained, also calls for speculation and conclusion, since he's not the one who prepared the chart.
Right, but he did give the foundation for the items that are written on it based on...
Objection,
The objection
argumentative.
sustained.
Now, you said on this redirect right now that depth of something's found doesn't matter, right?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
You were asked, does the depth of what something was found, does that matter? And you said no, because the remains were still in the grave.
Actually misstates the testimony. Objection.
Overruled.
Not in this particular case. It would matter if the evidence was found, the remains were found, and then the evidence was found, the sledgehammer was found. It will make a difference then.
So if B2 was found at a depth between 12 and 18 inches, but a cell phone case was found at 10.5 inches, it's safe to assume that the remains of B2 went into the ground before the cell phone case.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Can you tell the order in which something goes into a gravesite based on the depth that it's in that hole?
If it has not been disturbed, yes.
And when you said there was some disturbance to the grave B, correct?
Correct.
But when the things were being excavated, as shown in the different exhibits by the people, when that was being excavated, that part would not have been disturbed. Would that be accurate?
I really couldn't tell you if it was or if it wasn't.
Did it appear like things were dug up, rearranged, thrown back in, the dirt covered over by animal activity?
Not at the time they excavated it.
So if the sweatpants and women's undergarments were 17 inches down, and the head was 12 inches down, wouldn't that indicate to you, an experienced homicide investigator, that the pants are probably thrown in before the remains of B1?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
How many crime scenes have you worked in the homicide division?
I couldn't tell you many.
You couldn't tell me many, or you couldn't tell you how many?
I couldn't tell you. I did quite a few.
Quite a few. You've done this for 19 years, correct?
Correct.
How many years were you in homicide?
4.
During that 4 years in homicide, how many crime scenes did you go to where there was a dead body? Ballpark.
Probably at least 60% of those, if not more.
And how many scenes did you go to? For homicide investigation.
Probably at least 80% of those,
80% of what?
of the homicide investigations.
And what's the total number of homicide investigations you've been involved in?
I couldn't tell you the homicides. I investigated approximately 100 cases in my time there.
So approximately 100. How many of those involved remains that were recovered from being buried?
That I can remember, one.
One more than this one, or just this one?
One more than this one.
So you're not very experienced on recovering bodies that have been buried underground.
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained. We'll go ahead and take our afternoon recess, it's 10 to 15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, we'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes. Reflect, we are back in session, parties and counsel are present, all members of our jury and our alternates are present, witnesses back on the stand. Mr. Medina, Joey, any additional to the cross?
Just a couple questions. Increase in Mark 748A. Is this a clean and unmarked copy of 748?
Yes, sir.
Have anything further?
Anything on redirect?
Nope.
Do you have exhibits 181 and 183 there? They're photographs.
I believe they,
I think I may have returned them to the exhibit book, Your Honor. One 181 and 183. Does the court want them or the witness?
Yes. On exhibit 181, if you could take it out of the holder and put the letter A and letter B in the approximate location where grave A and grave B were, if you can see it on that.
I can't see it in here.
Okay. And wouldn't be able to do it on 183 either then?
No.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Any objection to Sergeant Avila being excused?
No, sir.
Subject to recall?
Sure. So you're excused from courthouse, you are still subject to recall. Okay?
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And did you have another witness today? Or?
No, that concludes our presentation for the day. We'll have more tomorrow.
Okay. So I guess we'll recess a little bit early today. Again, keep in mind that I can tell everyone's terribly disappointed. So we'll go ahead and recess. We'll see everyone back tomorrow morning at 9:30. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence, and we'll see everyone back at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Order back for 9:30 tomorrow morning. Yes, sir.
What? Yes, Your Honor.